If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warmer from below! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined here in a few minutes by Riley Frain. He does great work over at the Portal Report, along with Mid-Major Madness, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Certainly want to touch upon what we're all seeing out there in the Atlantic 10. I know that he's very much based out there and does a great job of covering that conference. I feel like there's some very intriguing teams. One team that stands out above the rest in VCU, but a lot of other teams that could be able to provide you with some bang for your buck. He also does a great job of just being able to gauge the northeast part of the country, mid-majors. So we're going to talk a little Metro Atlantic, open it up to some teams that he's feeling very bullish on. And there's one team out there in the American that I think is going to dethrone Memphis this year. We're going to be talking about that and so much more. And we're getting a lot of two-part chats right now because the transfer portal is very much dying down. We're not really seeing a lot of moves in general. And the teams that they are currently looking in the transfer portal, we'll talk about this in a minute for Riley. They're probably not going to be in for great season. So we've got that chat coming up and so much more. And I'm still going to be with you guys every single day throughout the offseason to be able to get you guys prepared because we've got 364 teams to be looking at and you're getting a lot of conference previews. We're going to get a lot of general chats to just take a look at angles for this upcoming season. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, name does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to access their funds anywhere and at any time, and they are able to give you cashback rewards for utilizing their fine service. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's talk with Mr. Riley, who does such a tremendous job looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X and his first and last name, Riley Frain. That is Frain on that last name. And Riley, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to get on here with you and talk some college hoops. Transfer portal. It seems like maybe the offseason's slowing down a little bit, but there's always a ton to talk about. So I'm excited to get into it.
Oh, no question. And I do want to start this off first things first. How do you view these teams that are still trying to add guys in the portal? Because now we're in very, very late June, and I do feel like if you're a team out there that is looking to be able to add some guys, man, you're really behind the 8 ball, and it might be a little bit rough for the upcoming season.
Yeah, it's few and far between teams that are still out there looking for guys. And for the teams that are maybe still looking to add a guy or two, it's certainly not anyone in the starting 5 or maybe a 6-man or anything like that. It's sort of depth rotational pieces. On the high major side, I really can't think of anybody off the top of my head. I know maybe Seton Hall was poking around recently from a couple guys who were still available. And here and there, we're maybe getting a name sort of trickling back into the portal just by nature of they're receiving an additional year of eligibility. For example, Dartmouth's Ryan Cornish, who signed with USC maybe 2 weeks ago, was granted another year of eligibility recently. So a couple guys who are just by nature of the way the NCAA is playing things out recently, getting the extra year of eligibility, working their way through the portal process. So here and there we get one or two guys. But just overall, it's quiet in terms of the talent left in the portal. Not a ton of big caliber splash guys that are going to be program influencers looking ahead to next season. So for those that are still, kind of looking for guys, you mentioned it, they're a little behind the 8 ball at this point. More so, programs a little bit further down the college basketball ladder, starting to sort out what's left in the portal, they can kind of add to their roster.
No question. And unfortunately, I have to say it, looking at you, UW Green Bay, who has completely fumbled everything ever since hiring on Doug Gottlieb. So that's not great for them, to say the least. But this is a program that did not fumble things, as I know that you're out there in the northeast part of the country. You do a great job of gauging these teams. And just before we came on this show, you were really highlighting LaSalle, what they've been able to do under Darius Nichols. And I am very impressed by them. And take me through what you've seen in their transfer portal haul and just how much you're liking this team for the upcoming season.
Yeah, no doubt it's a rebuild. They had to bring in a whole bunch of guys. I think they certainly brought in the most in the A10. I think it's 10 or 11 different names that they're bringing in just between Division One transfers and JUCO. So there's a lot of new pieces that are coming in, and just by nature of that, there's always gonna be some time where an adjustment period where everyone's getting used to everything. A brand new head coach, a brand new team. It's going to be pretty much a whole brand new roster. But I'm really excited about some of the names they were able to bring in. Coach Nichols and his staff this offseason. Off the rip, Noah Collier coming over from William and Mary, who averaged 12.5 points per game there last year, 5 rebounds, was really solid there. A competitive veteran who's going to be a solid piece in a front court for a team in the front court in the A10. You've got a guy like Marcus Randolph coming over from St. Peter's, who was a really solid product there. I think he's ready for a step up to a conference like the A10. I think LaSalle could be a good program for him to do it with. Got Jose Grullon, who's coming over from UT Martin, was a really solid scorer there. Shot about 41% from the field, 36% from three, averaged double digits per game there. On top of that, Coach Nichols bringing over a handful of guys from his Radford teams or that had connections to his Radford teams. I think of Josiah Harris, who was really solid there, a great rebounder who I think could be another solid piece in the front court alongside Noah Collier. Justin Archer from Georgia State, who previously spent some time at Radford under Nichols and is really solid there, sort of took a step back with his move to Georgia State this past season, was really competitive during his time at Radford. So again, a lot of new pieces coming in overall, but I like overall what they've been able to do. I think it's a team that's going to, as Nichols likes to play, he likes his teams to be tough. He always likes to say they like to have, the toughest 12 guys out there on the court. So I think this is a team that's tough, and on top of that, they've got some talent and a lot of depth.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I think that LaSalle has a chance to rise up in a Atlantic 10 where I really like what VCU has been able to do, even though they do lose their coach in the offseason. You add in their Phil Martelli Jr., I feel like that's been very rock solid, and there have been a lot of teams in the Atlantic 10 that have had really nice transfer portal hauls, but other than perhaps VCU, I just don't feel like there's really that clear team anymore, especially with, in my opinion, Dayton taking a little bit of step back, and I feel like spots number 2, 3, 4 in the conference, they're very much up for grabs. Not that LaSalle is going to be able to reach quite that far, but I do think that it's a very wide open conference after VCU.
Yeah, I think it would be a jump to say LaSalle is going to be that competitive this season. It's a rebuild again. It's going to take some time for them to make adjustments and for the new staff to understand the program, what it takes to compete there and everything like that. But I certainly think they're going to be more competitive than they have been in years past. On top of that, you mentioned it. At the top of the A10, VCU is sort of in the mix at the top, but outside of them, it seems like teams like St. Louis have always been in the mix, but then maybe have a year off. Dayton is always, in that top sort of 4 or 5 range, but have never been able to really capitalize and get the NCAA tournament bid under Grant. George Mason has been really good of late, but sort of a similar story. They haven't been able to maybe take that step into NCAA tournament contention. A team like Loyola Chicago, who's new to the conference, have been really competitive as well outside of that first season in the A10. So I like what they've been doing as well. A conference that had a ton of success, in the transfer portal this offseason. I think that only bodes well for the conference as a whole. I think it's going to be another competitive year, whether that means we're going to have an A10 that sort of beats up on itself like we have in years past, or we're going to see sort of a couple teams rise to the top of the pack. We'll have to wait and see. But I think there's a lot of teams with exciting talent, a lot of competitive teams in the conference as a whole, and I think that's going to make for some exciting, play when we get down to conference play. Hopefully it won't be too long from now.
Yeah, but it's going to feel like a long time. Fortunately, we have some baseball to be able to get us there, but man, it certainly is going to be a lot of fun to see what we get out there in the Atlantic 10 this season. As joining me on the show, we do have Riley Frain. He does a tremendous job over at the Portal Report, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and no doubt about it, the Atlantic 10, such a good conference out there in the northeast part of the country, but another conference I think is so intriguing is the Big East, because we've seen these power conferences, and certainly I feel like the Big East is one of them, make a lot of moves in the offseason, but I feel like out there in the Big East, they maybe have fallen behind a little bit what we've seen out of the SEC, what we've seen out of the Big Ten. I'm not sure how you take a look at things, but I do feel like for the Big East, you're going to see a rise to power once again for UConn, and I do feel like there are a few other teams doing a rock solid job, but I feel like Marquette has done themselves a little bit of a disservice by just completely avoiding the transfer portal altogether. And you mentioned it with Seton Hall. I think that that's very glaring that you've got a team that just feels like they're that down in the conference.
Well, I'll start with UConn, who you mentioned. Obviously, we think they're going to be one of the better teams in the conference, and they didn't even have to recruit the transfer portal too heavily, only bringing in 3 different guys, I believe. They're a team that's sort of found consistent success recruiting, through high school and bringing in, freshman recruits and finding finding consistency through that. Obviously, it's a program that guys want to stay with and play for. I think Hurley he's an interesting coach and interesting in the way that he goes about things.
No lack of confidence.
Yes, no lack of confidence. I think he's a guy that people want to play for at that. They haven't had to recruit the transfer portal too heavily. And still, I think they're a team that's going to find a ton of success this year. But you look a little bit further down the conference at teams like Seton Hall, who, they struggled a ton last year. And, they had to recruit the transfer portal really heavily, are bringing in 9 different guys this year. And, they still don't look like one of the more talented teams in the conference. Now, that being said, I think they have a good coach who can get things going. They're still going to be a competitive team. I think they'll be better than they were last year when, they only won, 4 or 5 games and just struggled all throughout the conference play. But, Seton Hall, I like what they've been able to do still, bring in, guys like Bud Clark, I think could be really good there. AJ Stanton, who's coming over from Miami, was a highly recruited prospect coming out of high school. I look at another team like Georgetown, who's bringing in a handful of prospects from the transfer portal, 6 or 7 guys. And still, I don't think, they have one of the most competitive rosters in the conference. So to your point, Greg, I don't think it's a conference that's taken, advantage of the transfer portal, maybe as wholly as they should. But then you kind of look at the top half. You look at a team like Xavier, who they have a new coach, obviously, with Richard Pitino coming in, and that leads to a rebuild, bringing a new head coach. And so they had to bring in 10 guys. But, I'm really intrigued by a lot of the names they could bring in. And I think this is a team that, from the get-go could be competitive in the Big East with Xavier. And, you look at some of the names they brought in, I think of Gabriel Posado coming over from Evansville, who was one of the most talented freshmen in the country. I think of a guy like Malik Moore from Montana, who was really solid there. I think of another guy like All Right from Valparaiso, another really solid freshman guard. I think of someone like Anthony Robinson from Virginia, who was a highly recruited prospect and is a guy in need of some more minutes, who didn't quite find the time at Virginia. I think he could be solid for a team like Xavier. I think there's an interesting sort of mix within the conference. You have teams like Xavier, who just by nature of a coaching change needed to invest in the transfer portal. A team like Seton Hall, who really struggled last year, and obviously because of that needed to invest in the transfer portal. And then you have teams like UConn, who really didn't need to invest in the transfer portal too heavily, or even a team like St. John's, who I know is bringing in 5 or 6 guys, but was still able to retain a handful of talent from last year that's going to help them to be competitive. So there's an interesting mix of teams, and the difference is that we've seen some of the teams throughout the conference in the ways they've invested in the transfer portal.
Yep, it certainly has been interesting to see how these teams have been individually attacking the transfer portal, the way that these teams have had just a various approach in general to how they've been able to mix and match in general. As joining me on the show, we do have Riley Frain. He does a tremendous job over at the Portal Report, and with Riley, he also does great work over at Mid-Major Madness. So on the flip side, I want to talk about a conference that it feels like they've just had their slip-ups in recent years. The Metro Atlantic Conference, it's one that I think is very much of intrigue. I want to open it up to Riley as well, talk about some of the teams that he feels like are going a little bit under the radar and have had good portal cycles. And I also have to talk about South Florida, a team that I'm really starting to feel bullish on. That's on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Riley Frain. He does a tremendous job over at the Portal Report, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Certainly has been on his grind all throughout the offseason, trying to get us set for the upcoming year. Also does some great work over at Mid-Major Madness, and that leads me into this because we left off talking about the Big East, and certainly that's going to be intriguing. But how about if we do turn things over to the mid-major side of things as well? And out there in the Northeast part of the country, we still have some teams that are still trying to recruit a few guys out there in the Northeast Conference. I think that that's a very interesting conference, but one conference I just feel like has fallen on tough times. I want to get your thoughts here. It's the Metro Atlantic. They've been very much poached by what we've seen here in the last few years via the transfer portal. I do feel like a team like a Siena is starting to rise up, and for Iona, even though I felt like Tobin Anderson was very wrongly fired, I think that they're an interesting team as well. But I want you to get your thoughts overall on this conference, because a few years ago it felt like it wasn't maybe the most like premier mid-major in all of college basketball, but I mean, they certainly were a rock solid solid one, and it feels like they've just gone down a peg or two ever since NIL and last few years have really taken hold.
Sure. I mean, I think it's tough. It's not a conference where I think guys are coming out of high school and thinking, you mentioned it. I think there was a time where it was one of the premier conferences in the Northeast, but a conference that's sort of fallen on hard times. So I don't think they're necessarily primed to sort of, succeed in terms of high school recruiting. I think you get a program like Iona who sort of stood out the past couple of years and has been able to bring in some high names. I think a team like even Siena has been able to recruit pretty well over the past couple of years. Overall, throughout the conference, is a team that's struggled for recruiting, and I think that in itself could sort of, prime the MAAC succeed in the transfer portal. I think it's a conference where maybe guys who were recruited to play at the high major level had a lot of, high major interest coming out of high school or whatnot, and maybe couldn't find the minutes right away, the playing time right away. They could step down to a conference like the MAAC and find success, and then that provides them opportunities in the future to maybe transfer up to another level, or continue playing at a strong MAAC school. Like, I think of Quinnipiac this year and how they were able to retain Amari Monroe, who was Conference Player of the Year last year and entered the transfer portal, and then he ends up returning for Quinnipiac. And, so there is a little bit of money, for some of the programs in the conference who are looking to get involved in NIL and recruit the transfer portal. I think of Canisius this year, who was really invested in the transfer portal after really struggling last year. I think only 3 or 4 wins on the record for them, but they bring in a handful of interesting guys who I think could help maybe turn this season around for them. Sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum like that, a team like Manhattan, who interestingly enough was able to retain some interesting guys this year. They're going to keep Devin Dinkins, who was Conference Sixth Man of the Year. He ends up coming back this year after considering entering the transfer portal. And so they didn't need to invest as heavily in the transfer portal, only bringing in one guy in Ernst Jones from Norfolk State. So to your point, Greg, I think it's an interesting spot, a spot that, there's a lot of interesting programs in big markets, New York City, Connecticut. I even think upstate New York itself, whether it be, like Syracuse area or Siena or different areas like that, Poughkeepsie, Marist. It's an interesting market. There's a lot of college basketball history for some of these programs. And so I think it's a conference that really needs to look to invest more in the transfer portal. And I think that, could helpfully sort of get themselves back to establishing as one of the premier mid-major conferences, in my opinion.
Yep, I think that it's a very interesting conference in general. And if they do stick in the, shall we say, a little bit more NIL, if they do stick in the resources, I think so as well, because there's such fertile recruiting grounds out there as well, because you have so many great high school / college, or you have so many great high school programs as well out there in the Northeast. So I am right there with you. And Riley, I do think that it's interesting what we're seeing out of some of those teams, but just who are a few other programs in general that they really have impressed you with what they've been able to bring in this offseason? Because clearly the Atlantic 10 is a standout. We talked a little bit about the Big East and the Metro Atlantic and how some of those teams have been, for lack of a better term, a little bit underwhelming, but who's just a team or two that you take a look at there, maybe they're not getting a ton of love and you feel like they should be.
Sure. Well, I'll continue with sort of the Northeast trend, and maybe another team that had a bit of a down year last year that we, consider sort of Northeast power, despite maybe them being an American East program, is Vermont. I mentioned it struggled a little bit last year, but, able to bring in a handful of guys in the transfer portal that I think are going to be really successful in a conference like the American East. Ben Johnson coming over from Bellarmine, who was, a double-digit guy, averaging double-digit points per game, that is, and, shot 34% from three-point range this past season. Bringing over a guy like Ben Michaels from Buffalo, who had a really strong freshman season there, and I think could be ready to compete for a program in the front court for a program like Vermont right away. They're bringing over a guy like Chris Kuzamelka from Loyola, Maryland, who, didn't quite struggle there. A really tough conference like the WCC, but I think, move down to the America East is, could be a really good spot for a program like that. So, I mentioned it, a little bit of a down year. This is a Vermont program under John Becker, who's sort of been an absolute power in the America East Conference. Expect them to get back to the winning ways this season with a lot of the transfers they were able to bring in. They're able to retain some really solid talent too. So that's a Vermont team I'm really excited about. Maybe another conference, if I can sort of continue with the East Coast trend, I'd like to move over to the CAA briefly. Another team that I think has really stood out this year is Campbell. They have a new coaching staff coming over. I love some of the moves they've been able to bring in the portal. They were able to do in the portal this offseason. They're bringing in 8 guys overall, and maybe just a handful of guys that stand out for me. Amiri Stewart coming over from Sacred Heart, really solid, 6'3", but he can play on the wing a little bit. Just a really competitive, tough scorer. Averaged about with 13 points per game, but, scored at 45% from the field. Sacred Heart moving over to the MAAC recently, so that's really tough. So that transition has been tough for them, and he was sort of a leader on that team this past season, so I like the addition for them there. Another guy I think that stands out for me coming over from Robert Morris, DJ Smith, who averaged about 9.1 points per game this year. Obviously coming from an NCAA tournament team, he's bringing over some exciting experience. I think could be a really solid addition in the CAA. And then I think the last guy that sort of stands out for me is Green Bay freshman Jeremiah Johnson, who's moving over to Campbell this offseason. I'm sure you know a little bit about his game, Greg, but averaged 10.5 points per game, 5 rebounds per game, really solid scorer on the interior, about 50% shooting, struggles a little bit from the outside, but I think a move over to Campbell could be really solid for him. He's going to play consistent minutes there. Obviously, that's really exciting. Maybe just one more name I'd love to mention that they're bringing in is Quinton Mitchell, who's coming over from UMass Lowell, a really experienced sort of senior guard/wing, averaged almost 17 points per game and 6.5 rebounds per game, shoots at about 50% clip from the field and almost 40% from three. I think the CAA is going to be a really exciting move from him coming over from a school like UMass Lowell, who's a really solid program in the America East over the past couple seasons as well. Just a really tough competitive defensive program, and I think Quinton Mincy, despite being more of a scorer, sort of fits that role as well. So Campbell, not traditionally a program we think of as super competitive in the CAA, but they bring in a new coaching staff this offseason. There's a lot of exciting talent coming in in the transfer portal. We have them ranked at 17th in the nation in terms of their overall transfer class coming in this offseason over at the Portal Report. So really excited to see what they can do in the CAA, a conference I cover really closely. And so those are two teams that have kind of stood out to me just from looking at our rankings really over the past couple weeks.
I absolutely love it. I love the look of all those teams. And then I want to throw out there one team because the more that I research them, the more that I love them. Because I do think that the American is a little bit down as a conference. I actually do think that Tulane has a chance to be a rise up in that conference. But South Florida is just really standing out to me because I think that a lot of people think that it's just a foregone conclusion that Memphis is going to be able to win this conference, what have you. But under Brian Hodgson, South Florida has had to really turn over a new leaf, bring in a lot of new guys. And I just really like this team, and I feel like there's not a lot of people talking about their transfer portal, but I think that they brought in a great coach, and I thought that they brought in a lot of talent this offseason.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of what Hodgson has done. Fellow New Yorker Brian Hodgson. Obviously, he got the job sort of pretty early in the offseason, was able to dive in right away. As far as underrated, we have them second in the American as far as their overall transfer class ranking. Just to mention a couple guys, I'm in love with Devin Hade and what he was able to do at Central Connecticut, a guy I covered pretty thoroughly over the past couple of years, but just a really tough competitive guard. He's got great size. I think SF is like sort of a great spot for him to land. I know coming from a team like Central Connecticut, it seems like a bit of a step up, but it's a rebuild, and I like what he can provide there. Obviously, Hodgson coming from Arkansas State is bringing over a couple guys who I think are going to be instant impact guys in his roster. Joseph Pignon, who's sort of a 6'5" guard/wing, does a little bit of everything, a really solid scorer. I love his game overall. I think he could have been a potential high major guy if he really wanted. Isaiah Nelson, almost 7 foot. He's going to play on the interior, coming over from Arkansas State this year. Obviously, Hodgson knows his game well and what he can provide. Almost averaging a double-double this past season with 11 points per game and 9 rebounds per game. Bringing over another guy like Josh Omajafal from Robert Morris, another guy with NCAA tournament experience, a veteran who I think is going to be a really competitive piece for them. And maybe just rounding it out, I love the addition of Xavier Brown from James Madison in his junior season this past year. Was really solid. Obviously, James Madison been really solid in the Sun Belt the past couple seasons. Xavier Brown was really good there this past year. He averaged about 11 points per game, and I think will be another good addition for Hodgson's backcourt. So, you pointed out, Greg, this USF transfer class maybe flying a little bit under the radar just as far as things, go in the America East. Obviously, Memphis sort of tends to dominate the headlines there, how things go. But I really love what Hodgson was able to do this offseason. I love him as a coach, and, I think this is a South Florida team that could compete in this conference off the rip.
Yep, I think so as well. I really like South Florida. I think that they've got a chance to perhaps be able to win this conference in year number one. Hodgson, we saw what he was able to do at Arkansas State, and we always see what you're doing, Riley, because you're doing such an amazing job gauging this great game that we all know and love of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
That was the perfect segue, Greg, but that's what the people follow you for, my man. Absolutely, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. I'm always do greatly appreciate the time. I do a lot of coverage on Twitter, just at Riley Frain, RILEYFRAIN. All pretty much college basketball, mid-major themed. I tend to skew a little more just East Coast based, just based on where I'm from originally, but we do tons of college basketball coverage all year long between my work at Mid-Major Madness and the Portal Report. I'll probably have a couple things just NBA draft related, maybe coming at the end of this week or early next week, but we'll have a lot of fun stuff throughout the rest of the offseason. So, for those interested, come check it out.
Riley does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball, and all the folks over there at the Portal Report, 10 out of 10 with their great insight. And every single time any one of them joins me, I always know that I'm going to get great insight, and Riley delivered the goods today. So big thanks to Riley for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I've got you guys covered every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.